So we're sitting in Hyde Park after a little bit of a fiasco at an Airbnb that we had early on. And I'm sitting here with Philippa Wilkin. Welcome, Philippa.
Thank you.
It's great to have you. So Philippa and I know each other. Well, tell us a little bit about your story before we get into some of the more practical things. Why are we here recording a podcast in London? You know, and what is it? It's October 2019. Tell us a little bit about your story in terms of what brought you to this moment, what brought you to Breathwork. I'd love to just start there.
Yeah, awesome. So firstly, thank you for having me. And it's absolutely amazing to see you. It's been a long time. So yeah, good question. My story. So really, it goes back 10 years now of being in a place where I was highly successful. I had a job in the insurance industry in London, and I pretty much thought I could have everything that I dreamed of, that I wanted. And at that point, everything broke down. Everything like disintegrated. A long-term relationship ended, and I was in a lot of pain, actually. And I was really what I would describe as having an existential crisis of, oh my God, like, what am I doing? Why am I here? Am I in this job because I love it, or like, what's going on? And so really that catalyzed my journey to be here now, you know, sat on this bench in Hyde Park in London with you, to answering or finding some answers to some of those questions of like, who am I? What am I here for? Because it wasn't that, you know, I was very clear in that moment that it wasn't that thing. And so I guess my journey for the last 10 years has been finding out who I am, you know, beyond the conditioning of who I thought I was and what society or my parents or anybody else expected me to do. And, you know, what I'm here to do and how I'm here to serve and how I'm here to bring my, I guess, unique gifts, the essence of who I am to the world. And that's, you know, I haven't figured out all those answers, but I found a lot along the way. And so that's what's brought me here, you know, through different means and finding breathwork and yoga and meditation. I've done lots of weird and wonderful things in my time. You know, we met last year.
Through synthesis.
Through synthesis. So, yeah, being involved in psychedelic scene for a short period of time as well. So all of these different tools have led me to where I am now. So it really is a synthesis of many, many different things and many experiences that have brought me here. And breathwork has played a really, really big part in that. So, yeah.
Well, let's start with, you know, what I'd love to bring us back into is like the moment, right? So,
yeah.
Like, where was the shift for you? What was the catalyst to the existential crisis in terms of waking up and realizing, oh, I'm working in a job, I'm successful, I'm not happy, and I think my path is elsewhere, and I'm going to go pursue that path. What was that moment? Bring us into that moment.
Yeah. So, I had this job. I was earning a load of money. I was having, you know, I had a lot of responsibility. I was working in the city, you know. I was running part of a business that was essentially getting on for $80 million at the time. And my work was very repetitive. And I kind of was getting to the point where, like, I don't want to see another email. I don't want to necessarily, you know, deal with another client. But at the same time, I was stuck between a rock and a hard place because I was earning a load of money, which facilitated a lifestyle that I enjoyed, you know, holiday, vacations, whatever. I was in a place where I didn't really have to think about money. But what had got me, you know, to that place was a lot of hard work and dedication, but also overriding really what my true underlying values were at some level. And so I was very emotionally disconnected. You know, every few months with my then, you know, partner at the time, he'd say, you know, I don't know what's going on with you. I don't know how you feel. You don't talk to me. And really the best I could do was I would cry, you know, because I couldn't communicate. I couldn't express my feelings. I couldn't tell him what was going on for me. And, you know, a few weeks later, I'd say, yeah, I'll do better. And then, you know, a few months later, I'd be back in the same position. So I was just very disconnected from really who I was and what my emotions were trying to tell me, and really unable to communicate with anybody in an intimate sense what was going on for me. So there was a part of me that knew something different was out there and that I wasn't happy doing what I was doing. But the other part of me was like scared of change. And, all of this, I guess, facade that I'd built in a way, right? Around my work and my job. And that really defined me as a person.
It was your identity at the time.
It was my identity at the time. So that, even the thought of letting go of that was like scary as hell. And I'm sure anybody out there listening to this can relate, particularly if they're on the edge of a career change or they're going through some kind of transition. Really, we're breaking down a lot of the things that we thought we were. And the reality is we weren't in the first place. We were just, sticking to somebody else's expectation, trying to live up to something outside of us. And we get warped in that process. We get distracted from what we're really, really here to do. So that was what was going on. I was underneath, to the outside world, my life looked like the perfect life that anybody would want to have.
Mm-hmm.
Inside, there was a lot of turmoil going on, but people didn't see it. And I think that's true in the world today. People are suffering in silence because we've lost this ability to communicate human to human. We're involved in social media or over computers. We're even, on the tube or the bus with our headphones in, we're very, very disconnected. And unfortunately, that I don't think that is a good thing for the human condition. With really connection, conversation, even physical touch, I think is such an important factor that we're negating. And it's no wonder that we are feeling disconnected and isolated and confused. So
how did that bring you into breath then? So where does breath work come into the story? Because that's how I know you, right? I know you as this fantastic transformational breathwork facilitator. And obviously, our conversations range beyond just breath into spiral dynamics and into, generally things related to doing personal work and understanding more aspects of ourselves. But I feel like one of your key contributions and gifts is like leading people into this sort of liminal space by utilizing breath. So I'd love to just go into that a little bit. How did you find breath work and what does breath mean to you?
Yeah. So I'll just give a little explanation perhaps as to what breath work is in case people out there don't know. My interpretation, and this kind of a commonly used one, is two things. Breath work is really about becoming aware of your breath. So just becoming aware of your physical body, what's happening with your breathing, right? That's breath awareness is part of what I would class as breath work. And the other part is then the conscious modulation or change of how we breathe. So doing particular breathing exercises, breathing in different parts of the body, and being consciously aware of changing the pattern or adapting the pattern to, I would say, achieve a particular outcome. But what we can do with that is we can create particular states. And one of those states can be the liminal space, right? So that's just a kind of brief overview of what breath work is. So
before you keep going, and could you just do a brief explanation of maybe what are some of the fundamental differences between Wim Hof breathwork, because a lot of people know Wim Hof, transformational breathwork, which is the one I've learned from you. Yeah, what are kind of the key differences between those two?
Yeah, that's a great question. And in many senses, they're all overlapping. That's what I would say. There's no one thing that's the best, in my opinion. They all bring different flavors, if you like. So something like Wim Hof, which I really enjoy, is really with more of an angle towards performance and immunity. I've done a little bit of it. One of my good friends is a Wim Hof instructor, and it's really, really powerful. So it works with a different combination of deep breathing exercises with breath holds, either where you have the breath in or where you have the breath out. And there are also other combinations of accelerated breathing. So you start off slowly with a breath with no pauses, and you get faster and faster and faster until, again, you use some form of breath hold, either with an inhale or an exhale. Both of these can create altered states. It's undeniable that for me, all breath work really creates altered states of different and varying degrees. My view is that Wim Hof is more more aimed towards performance, and also in combination with cold exposure, so cold shower therapy, which again enhances immunity. The form that I practice, which is called Transformational Breath, is using a connected breath, so no pause between inhale and exhale. It's a more relaxed form, so we're not taking huge big breaths that we might do with the Wim Hof style. It's more flowing process of going with the breath rather than forcing the breath, albeit we do invite people to take a bigger breath than normal. In that process, we also use sound, so expression, and really we use that in a way that's more like a chant and use the vibration of that in the body. We also use movement, so to physically move the energy in the body and perhaps express something physically that we might be feeling. And we also use physical body work, so touch work, so acupressure, releasing certain muscles or certain points in the body to help facilitate the process. And also affirmations, so words of affirmation, positive words of affirmation. And all of these come together in the system that I use. And further to that, there are many other types of breath work. There's a holotropic form of breath work, there's soma breath work, there are many, many different schools. Fundamentally, they're modulating the breath in a different way, and many of them use similar techniques. It just boils down to the specifics of the setup as to whether it works, whether somebody has a preference for one over the other. But my invitation is always go and experiment, Go and try it for yourself. I often say with breathwork that it's a bit like eating an apple. I can tell you what an apple tastes like. Like it's crunchy and it's sweet and it's juicy, and I can tell you all the words in the world about what an apple tastes like, but until you eat the apple, you're not going to know. So that's my encouragement always. Go and try different things, see what you like, see what you don't like, see what you get from it, see how you feel, make up your own mind.
So why did you choose transformational breathwork then? What was that process like for you?
I don't know if it was a choice, actually, because I found breath work specifically after I'd done lots of different things. So 10 years ago, when I was like, who am I? What am I doing? Where am I going? I had no idea. That started me on the path of yoga, meditation, probably for the best part of 5 years. Mainly, if I'm really honest, to keep myself from not going crazy. I had a lot of, from that moment onwards, rather than being emotionally numb and void and shut down, I went the opposite way. It was like everything was overwhelming. I was tears, sadness, I was going through a real challenging time, and I turned to yoga as a way of trying to keep sane, if I'm really honest. And so I've been practicing, and that took me to one of the Mind Body shows in London. And that was in 2014. And I'd been thinking about doing this breathwork session thing for a while. And it just so happened that at this show, there was a breathwork session. So I went along, and there were about 40 or 50 people in the room. And it was with a guy called Alan Dolan, who is an amazing breathwork facilitator who's called the Breath Guru. And he led this session, right? It's about 2.5 hours, people from all walks of life, as I said, 40, 50 people. And at the end of the session, there were lots of people sharing their different experiences. For me, my first session was quite physical. I had a lot of tingling in my face. I had tingling in my fingers. I felt energy moving through like different parts of my body. And I was like, oh, this is really interesting. This is really interesting. And at that point, I knew there was something in it for me that I needed to go and explore. And at the end of the session where everybody was sharing and they had been crying or laughing or, having big catharsis, or they were explaining their experience and how moving it was, then I was like, oh, there's really something in this for me. I really need to know more. And so from that, I was also in a place where I really knew I needed to transition from my career. I'd already that year been to Brazil, and I came back from Brazil, and I was like, okay, I've tried these different jobs to see if it's me or the job. It's the job.
I'm definitely cool. The drums, they're
The drums, not so.
Yes. It's not my thing, right?
No.
It just wasn't your thing. Yeah.
That wasn't my thing.
It's not most people's thing.
No, it's not most people's thing. So I'd had this idea that I need to go and live in Brazil, right? This is about 2 months, month or two before. I need to go and live in Brazil. What am I going to do? I don't know what I'm going to do. I just need to leave, and I don't have a plan of what's next. So I was still in my job, but I went to this workshop and I thought I need to explore it. So I think 2 or 3 months later, I just booked myself straight on the facilitate. Oh no, not the facilitator course, but the course, right? To learn how to do it for myself. So during the end of that year, towards later in that year, about 4 or 5 months later, I'm booked on this course. And it was just a slow progression, really. It was like an unfolding. So I was getting more information. I was understanding more about myself. I was what I would describe as integrating some of this emotional stuff that had been stuck with me for a long time.
Can you give a couple examples of that? What was some of that emotional stuff?
Oh, yeah. Yes and no. I think by that point, I'd been to talk therapy for a couple of years, and that had been really helpful in understanding why I was doing what I was doing and how I was stuck, and also showed me my resistance to talking about how I felt, right? So that was really, really beneficial. But what I found is it wasn't necessarily getting to the root cause of the emotional stuckness. It's all very good talking about it, but I wasn't feeling it. So breathwork allowed me to go into some of the pain that I'd experienced and repressed, some of the challenging perhaps times in my life that I'd put a lid on and I didn't want to deal with. And I was able to go into that emotion, into that scenario, and actually release it. And it wasn't about getting rid of it, but it was about accepting what had happened. And in that space, in the breathwork session, I was able to see, I guess, the harmony or another side to that experience and actually resolve it. Mm. So it was really powerful for me somatically as well to feel in my body some of these emotions and allow them to move on and leave, right? And that might have been through the expression, so making some sound. Perhaps I was really, angry and frustrated, so maybe I was either screaming into a pillow or, sounding out loud, and really allowing myself to go through these experiences and express, right? Because I think that's another big part where we're stuck in society. We're all, particularly in British society, like stiff upper lip, nothing's wrong with me, I'm fine. Whereas really we're raging inside, or we're fearful, or we're frustrated, or we're scared,
sad,
or we're sad,
angry, whatever else it might be.
Exactly. So that was really great to have, I guess, a catharsis in a way at some moments. And other moments were experiencing bliss and joy and actually feeling my heart open, and that there was something greater beyond me. And I've never been a particularly religious person. I've always had a sense that there's something beyond me. But in those moments, I was really able to experience that grace, for want of a better word, that brought tears to my eyes just from breathing. And this is what I want to say, is that the reason I love breathwork so much is because we have it at our fingertips or the end of our nose, right? The air is free for now.
It's not in China anymore.
It's not in China.
They
apparently
actually get sold bottles of fresh air from Canada. But for now.
I know, this is crazy. But for now, air is free, and these tools are free in the sense of you go and learn how to do this. You have this as a tool for life. Wherever you are, whenever it is, you can go and sit down and center yourself or process something that might be stuck and that might have been stuck for a very long time, right? To enable you to really be the person who you are underneath all of the bullshit. Right. So that's why I love breathwork so much, is like anytime, any place, like meditation, anytime, any place, you can drop into this space and reconnect with who you really are. And that for me is what breathwork is and does.
Full stop.
Full stop.
Well, and ever since we've known each other, it's been about 1.5 years now.
Yeah, maybe even longer.
This has been the recurring lineage of our conversation. It's like we kind of ping back and forth. Obviously, I'm a big fan of psychedelics, and those are exogenous. Those come from outside.
Mm-hmm.
And what's so powerful about breath, as you mentioned, is it's endogenous. It's within us. And even over the last month or so, I've been getting deeper into morning rituals. And I read Aubrey Marcus's Own Your Day, which I'm normally hesitant to read any sort of tactical kind of self-help books, because I went through that stage in my early 20s and I was like, all right, well, I went through that stage, like I don't need people to continue to tell me what to do. I get it, until like I fell off the bandwagon and I was like, okay, maybe I should get back into it, right? And something that Aubrey recommends is, as part of a morning ritual, basically doing some Wim Hof breath. So I've been getting more and more into that. And what I've noticed is it's sort of like throughout our daily existence, we just take on a lot of stuff and it kind of piles on and it piles on and it piles on. And it's not until we're able to like clear the vessel, so to say, and come with a clear vessel that we can actually fully show up as who we are, regardless of all the bullshit, as you mentioned. And what I found breathwork to be so effective at is it's clearing the vessel. And every morning being able to drop in and clear the vessel. And I remember specifically there was an experience that we did before synthesis last year where you led me through some transformational breathwork right before I went into a psilocybin experience. And essentially what it did is it sort of just like, because I had been holding on to so much sadness throughout that process, it sort of just cracked me open to the point then where I could even just allow myself to express everything that had been sort of like stuck under. And ever since then, I've been, we haven't spoken about it a lot on the podcast or publicly, but I've just been so interested in breath as a modality that can be utilized consistently in a healthy way to bring us back into like, who we really are, as you said.
Yeah.
So then when it comes to let's talk about, I don't want to like spend too much time on psychedelics because I feel like, we get enough of that and you're so great with breath work, but I would love to talk a little bit about your experience with synthesis. We had started this retreat in April 2018. And from what I remember, you were there for the first 3 pilot retreats.
For the first pilot.
For the first pilot. So you were there for the first pilot retreat. You were there for... Were you there for the second 2 as well? The ones in July and August?
No, just the first one.
And then you were back in November once we moved into the place just outside of Amsterdam. Yeah. So I'd love to hear about your experience. What was it like to lead breath work at a psychedelic retreat? And just kind of walk us through that process for you.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. For me, as you remember our conversation in May of last year, my primary interest at that point in the psychedelic space was supporting integration, and coming to an experience such as, a psychedelic ceremony is quite a mind expanding experience, let's face it. And so my interest in the field wasn't necessarily to do with the psychedelics. It was to do with what do people do when they go home. And I think you'll remember that conversation that we had of really that's my focus. So the same was true with coming to synthesis. And as you know, I came as a participant, thanks to your kind invitation.
I forget these things. I'm like, weren't you just there facilitating from the get-go?
No.
Did you facilitate at any of the first? That's right, because you had never done psychedelics before, right? Oh, so bring us back into that. You were on the first pilot retreat for synthesis that we ever did. What was that like then doing psychedelics?
That was, it was an incredible experience.
The guacamole, remember the
guacamole? It wasn't guacamole.
Yeah, it was that.
So that was
not guacamole.
that was a really very, very powerful and profound experience, and led me to understand at a greater level, I think, what what was happening within me and also what was happening within people when they were going through these experiences. And that was primarily the reason I came. You know, we were talking about integration, we were talking about breathwork, and I figured that I couldn't walk the talk and I couldn't help and support people if I hadn't been through the process myself, right? So that was my primary motivation. It's like, okay, I need to walk the talk. So if I'm going to do this in this area, then I really need to have the experience. And so coming on, and obviously coming from that was then discussions about how we could work together. And then joining in November when Synthesis had a permanent location for the first time. And so kind of happened by default in a way, in that I was facilitating another retreat, the second retreat that I'd facilitated with Martijn. And it so happened that he'd asked me to come and facilitate another longer Synthesis retreat. And then I happened to stay at the venue in between. And kind of by happy coincidence, I guess, as you were there at the time as well, you'll remember, it was, okay, what about putting some breathwork sessions into the retreats coming up if you're here? So I was like, oh, okay. So really, that was a happy coincidence that ended up to be very, very powerful and beneficial for everybody that was coming to the retreat and going through the process. And so it really happened in a way that was quite organic, and it just fitted in. You know, it just made sense. And my experience of working in the retreat setting was amazing to see that people were coming for a ceremony, right? They were coming for the psychedelic. And some people had heard of breathwork. Some people had done breathwork because of Michael Pollan's book, How to Change Your Mind, which talks about his experience with holotropic breathwork. And so I think it's great to hear that more people are becoming exposed and understanding that there's another method out there, which is great. So we would have a mix of people, but many people hadn't either heard of breathwork or done any breathwork. And so adding it into the retreat was a really powerful but unexpected benefit to many people. And it really helped them to lessen their fear of what might come during the ceremony. It really allowed them to open up, and it really allowed them to relax a lot more and to trust themselves and to trust the process. So rather than having perhaps a lot of fear and anxiety coming up, what's going to happen, for many people it being their first experience, it enabled them to really be able to let go and go into the process at a deeper level, I would say, and also to be able to be more in contact with their body, more in touch with their body. Because this is what I find in the Western world, particularly, we're very disembodied. We're very in the head. We're very much in the mental space. We're breathing up in our chest as well, which correlates with that. And we're very unattached or disassociated from our physical sensations. So breathwork is a really amazing way of bringing people into their body, really having a sense of grounding and feeling into their body and trusting their body. Mm. And for some people, it can be a very visceral experience. And that visceral experience can help them understand what they've been holding on to. Right? And we call that in the body like body armor. The tensions that we build up, almost like the physical armor that we put on to protect ourselves, we can become viscerally, so physically aware of how tense or tight our body is, right? So when the energy starts flowing in the body, for some people, it can be a very strange, unusual experience, as I'm sure you've experienced as well, tingling or energy moving around or feeling of expansion or feeling of vibration. Some people have never had this experience in their life. And it's like, whoa. And sometimes I used to say, that's the warm up. Now you know.
You got a sense for it, right?
You got a sense, right?
Stick your toe in the pool.
Yeah, and if you can go through this, if you can endure, sometimes breathwork is challenging, because there's stuff that we don't want to face. But you keep breathing, you're gonna shift it, right? You're gonna integrate it. That's the thing I can promise you. It's like for some people that might have had a challenging experience, it's like, wow, you've got through this challenge, right? you can prove to yourself that nothing actually, even if you've had some things challenging come up, that's not going to kill you, right? You're not going to die. And that's what most of us, I think, are stuck with, this expectation or belief at some level that if I feel my emotions or I feel my sadness or I feel my pain, I'm going to die. So I don't want to go anywhere near there because that's not good. I don't want to be there and I don't want to be stuck there. But the reality is you don't get stuck anywhere. If you really go deep into an emotion, 90 seconds is really the maximum you're going to spend in it, right? And there might be tears and there might be catharsis and there might be, but we never get stuck anywhere. The human experience is always fluctuating, right? So that really, for me, was the benefit of that environment, and to the people coming into that environment, was that it gave them a sense of grounding in their body. It gave them a sense that they could overcome anything. It gave them a sense of how disconnected perhaps they'd been, and that this was accessible. You know, this changing state, this emotional integration, this becoming whole and who we really are, and connecting deeply with ourselves, is possible just with breath, you know, with nothing outside. So ongoing as an integration, you know, you come and you have this experience and you have this amazing, you know, journey and visuals and everything else, but you go home and now what? You know, those, for me, those types of experiences are there to be integrated. They're there to be utilized. So one way of continuing that journey, a tool you can take home, is breath. And that was the original conversation, you know, coming back to way back last year that we were having. And so that was my experience too. So it was great to see what I perhaps conceived or perceived might be the case actually had a grounding in my experience and the feedback that I was getting there. So
now, one more tactical question I want to ask before diving into some of the current things that you're excited about is just, you know, in our conversation so far, you've mentioned there are these various spaces that you can access with breathwork. So you mentioned the body armor. We talked about the liminal space. You know, the way that I think a little bit about it, it's like you have the physical kind of emotions that come up. And then once you get through the physical, you maybe go into the emotional things, the sadness or the anger that comes up. You know, some people have full-blown mystical experiences with this. So I'd love if you could just, you know, talk our listeners through what are those various stages from a breathwork perspective that we're like stepping into the deeper and deeper that we go into this altered state.
Great question. So I think primarily the first thing, if people are disconnected from their body, is a lot of physical sensations. So this awareness that we live in a meat suit, you know, we have this thing that moves, lives, breathes, and has sensation. And often we're numbed out to that sensation. We might have an ache or pain that we don't even realize we have, and we're just shoving it down. So the process can be very physical. You might have tingles. You might feel like your arms are levitating. You might have a headache, for example, as the energy starts moving, and really you're clearing out the crud from an emotional perspective, right? In an energetic perspective. You might notice that you're really tired. You might notice that you're really physically full of energy, right? So physically, we become a lot more aware of our body, is the first thing I would say. And also from a physical perspective, most of us are not utilizing our diaphragm, breathing with our diaphragm, which sits here, right, at the base of the ribs. And really, if you look at how a baby breathes, or a young child, their chest moves, their belly moves, they expand, you know, they're like a big accordion almost. And as we develop and become adults, we tend to lose that capacity. So really the focus is on opening that capacity up so that we can be utilizing all of our respiratory system, right? So we can get the air in. Often we have tension, perhaps underneath the diaphragm, underneath the ribs in the soft part of the belly. When we have that, it makes it difficult to use the diaphragm. But ultimately, we know when we're using the diaphragm, which is the primary muscle for breathing, when our abdomen does move, or certainly our side ribs move. And this moves down into the abdominal cavity and displaces whatever's in there, right? Your lunch. So physically, we're aiming to breathe with our diaphragm. So our belly moves, and also that we open our chest up, right? Because often we're quite closed. Maybe we've had some heartache. Maybe we've lost somebody, and we tend to close this area down to protect ourselves. So opening up our chest. So from a physical perspective, we're really looking to get all of this system moving and open. And any tension in the physical body might restrict us to do that. And usually that tension is related to some kind of emotional imbalance experience that we've held in the body. Okay. So we're holding our experiences really in the body. And that's when I talk about body armor. Often we build up these protections as a way of not feeling. And that's when I refer to body armor, tension in the muscles that prevent us or keep us safe, really. You know, these things have a purpose. They keep us safe. We perceive they do anyway, until they no longer serve us and we become rigid and we become stuck in patterns. Mm-hmm. So physically, lots of different sensations, but really it's about opening up the capacity, because we're sat over a desk often on a computer, not thinking about our breath. And often what we do is when we don't want to feel an emotion or when we get stressed, we hold our breath. And really we trap in that moment everything and anything. Our emotions, we suppress them. So it's opening up. Then we can go into this kind of, I would say, mental and emotional space. So that could be a memory that comes up. It could be a feeling that comes up without a memory attached, but a physical sensation in the body. And these often are things that we've suppressed or repressed at some point. And so they come up really for us to recognize them and to address them and let them go. So it's really in that moment we're changing our perception. We're accepting something has happened. We're perhaps feeling the feelings or the emotions that we suppressed at the time. We could even be seeing the perfection in everything of that happening. And so it allows us to have some kind of resolution and integration of that experience rather than carrying it around with us. Okay, and also perhaps we have a catharsis, maybe we cry, maybe we get angry. And on the flip side, you know, not only do we suppress the things that we don't want to feel, typically fear, anger, pain, we also cut ourselves off from joy and love and peace, right? Kind of live in this little bracket in the middle, which is a bit stagnant and stuck and numb.
Gray.
It's gray, right?
Gray, yeah.
We don't have to have this experience. We don't get to have this experience of life that has many, many colors, right? It is gray. It's everything in between. So we can also experience these positive and happy moments and joyous or even blissful moments. So really that's from an integration point of view, we're clearing out our psyche. We're allowing things to become conscious that often we've suppressed. So the unconscious is becoming conscious, and we can then put the two and two together and integrate some of these experiences. The other area really is what I would describe as spiritual, and that's not, you know, any dogmatic position. That's just whatever that means for you. For me, that's a deep connection to myself, with who I am. And for other people, that might be a creator, you know, all that is, God, if you're religious, whatever it is, grace, the universe. But we can go into this state where we experience the totality of everything, not too dissimilar to, you know, some forms of psychedelic state. And we can receive messages, so we can receive insights and wisdom and healing and all kinds of things, you know. And so this, for me, really what breathwork does, and might sound a bit hippie, but it really helps people reconnect with their soul. And then when you do that, I don't need to tell you what the next steps are.
Yeah.
Right? It's not about me being this teacher and telling you where to go and what to do. When you connect with that inner authority, you have your direction. And so the more you can do that, the more you can really live in your own values and true to yourself. And that for me is the path to, let's say, happiness, but, you know, at least contentment and fulfillment, because really you're living true to yourself and not the world around you, which I think we, you know, for many, many, if not most of my life, I've been in that position of living by other people's expectations, and it's freaking painful.
Because you're not listening to what you need.
Right. And
right? To what the self needs. And,
right.
You know, it's kind of like, it's the path of self-realization.
Yeah.
And just like sitting in that. And it's often, we live in a world that's very distracting and is built in some ways intentionally to distract us from that.
Yeah.
And that's often where this tension, you were talking earlier about how you had this fear when you were in that state where you couldn't express things, you could only cry, and the fear of like, well, what's on the other side of this? And I feel like this is a thing that so many people are going through right now in our culture, because once we have these experiences with breathwork or with psychedelics or whatever else it might be, through Byron Katie's or through what's his name again? The guy DeMartini, which I want to get into next. When we have these experiences, it's really just getting us to listen to ourselves again, and that's oftentimes the most powerful thing that we can do.
Absolutely, all the paths lead to the same top of the mountain. Coming back to self, because you have the wisdom.
It's already there.
It's
always been there.
But probably most of us from a young age have been conditioned to be something else. We're born and our parents have expectations, and it's going to be a doctor or a lawyer or, some form of external success. And that's really not what we're here for. If that aligns with you. But, we're here ultimately to be our own people, to be our own person, right? And to follow our own unique path. And many of the ways that society functions these days, whether it's modern take on parenting and manners and morals to education systems, are all imposing something from the outside onto us. And particularly if you look at the moralistic, moral conduct and what is moral, you can't narrow down what is moral, because it's culturally contextual as well. You go to a different country, you have different view on what is moral and what's not. Somebody in India, for example, showing you, is it India? Showing the bottom of their feet, is inappropriate, for example. Whereas here it's, nothing. So there are so many different confusing models that we're born into, and we think that they're normal because everybody else follows them. But many of them don't make sense. But we live by those constructs until we get to a point where we realize, holy shit, the self-actualization of none of this makes any goddamn sense.
And it's all limiting.
And it's all limiting.
It worked like a few hundred years ago.
Right.
And that's sort of when we get back into breathwork and psychedelics, it's like this adaptation. Like they help us to adapt to this new way of being, feeling everything along the way, but still being able to like flow and move with that. So when you talk about like removing blockages, we're talking about clearing the vessel. It's like the metaphor of the river, we just need to like unblock all these things that are preventing our river from flowing. And then we could keep going into that, but I feel like that would be a little bit of a rabbit hole.
But I think this is why we kind of get stuck, because some of the things that we feel that perhaps we shouldn't feel. And particularly in British culture, but many cultures, we're encouraged to not to use our GPS system, which I would describe as, our emotional system, what makes us feel good. We're made to believe in a different system that, you have to work hard and you have to follow this process, and then you'll be happy. But that really isn't how life works. If we're all unique. Doing the same process for everybody is not going to fulfill everybody. Right. Some people it might do, but I think this is where we get stuck. A lot of the time is imposition from outside authority, which isn't ours. Find your own inner authority, follow that path. That is fulfillment, that is success.
So now that's a really great transition point for what we were talking about earlier. Tell us a little bit about what you're most excited about right now. Like what's really lighting you up. I'm just watching you and you're just smiling, and you were going on and on about it this morning. I was like, let's save some of this because it's super interesting.
Yeah. Awesome. So what I'm lit up by right now is something I've discovered a couple of years ago, and I've only just had the opportunity to actually sit and do some courses for, but it's something called the DeMartini method. And it's developed by a guy called Dr. John DeMartini, which I'm hoping that you're going to get on here. And he has been working in the fields of neuroscience, philosophy, religion, and studying, researching, and teaching in this area of human development, really, and human consciousness for the last 47 years. And he's developed this method, which is a cognitive process of balancing the mind, for the best part of how I would describe it. And so where he's coming from really is that many of our perceptions are biased and skewed. So we take a snapshot of what's happening and we put a label on it. And we don't see beyond that label. We categorize things in black and white. And where we categorize things in black and white, it actually narrows our mind down. We become more subjective and we have a narrow view of the world. So that actually creates, stress in the body. If I compare it to something like psychedelics or breathwork, we are zooming out. This is where I feel we're having a bigger perspective, right? When we get all human and she did this and he did that, right? We're coming down to the human, the little human with opinions and beliefs, which aren't necessarily the case. It's just what I see and I perceive somebody doing, right? And I've put that in my head. Really, we're zooming out and we're seeing actually that there's a perfection in everything. So this process really is identifying our biases. So either the people that we look up to or the people that we look down on. And where we look up to somebody, often we are infatuated with certain traits of them and we inject their values perhaps into our system, right? Likewise, if we have somebody that we look down on or we resent, we look down on them because we don't believe that we also own the same traits, okay? And we try and inject our values onto them. Either way, it means that we don't live in our values. We're too busy either taking on from somebody else or putting on the person what we perceive as below us. So we're out of this state of harmony and we're out of this state of connecting with our mission and our purpose. So this process is a question and answer process that you go through, and it has various different stages. And what it's doing in that process is making you aware of the unconscious material that you've chosen not to see in the moment and balancing either side of that equation. So we've taken a judgment and we're balancing that judgment with actually, no, that's when we go through the process, we see that was our judgment. It's not actually the case at all. It's not the reality of what was happening. Many other things were happening in that situation. We've just chosen to see one part. So the question and answer process takes you through seeing how either we own those traits within ourselves when we've done the exact same things within ourselves. And that's usually why we resent them, because we don't want to own the fact that we have the capacity or we've done these things, right? Likewise, if we are in admiration of somebody or infatuation with somebody, that we also own those traits, right? Because often we're too humble to recognize that we own those traits. So you go through this process, and really what it does is it collapses any emotional charge that you have around an individual, right? Or a circumstance. So rather than reacting in the way that, somebody always pushes your buttons, I did this experiment where I spoke to my mom and my grandmother. I think it was during the week, after I'd done this training. And they were saying things to me usually that would wind me up and piss me off. And, I've done a lot of work, but I'm still human. And I had these conversations with them after I'd done this process. And I was just like, oh, nothing, no response, no reaction, nothing whatsoever. No guilt, no pride, just very much connected to myself, knowing that what I was doing, even though they were perhaps worried about it, was perfect for me. I didn't need to justify myself. So it was very clear to me in having done this process on myself, that I needed to do the facilitator training, which is what I've just done. And hence why I'm so lit up about it, because it really is a completely different paradigm shift to how mental illness is being dealt with, to how something like grief is being dealt with. Because again, there's a process for grief, which if I hadn't have seen it with my own eyes, I wouldn't have believed. But a woman that had lost her husband a year before had her feelings of guilt and shame and missing her husband and everything else dissipated within two hours.
Gone.
So he says there is no reason that the human race needs to suffer any more than 2 to 3 hours with the grief. And as I said, if I hadn't have seen it with my own eyes, I would have said, yeah, whatever.
Well, what's happening, like in that process, what's happening? Like, what did you experience or what did you observe?
Yeah, so
within
it's,
that?
again, it's a Q&A process. And what it says, what he says is that where we infatuate with something of somebody, so perhaps we lose somebody, we become infatuated with the things that we've are missing, right? So what we are unable to identify are that those things that we miss are actually still present with us, but in a different form. So you go through this process of identifying all of the different forms that are there, that are providing exactly the same thing, but that you're not aware of. So it's bringing to your conscious awareness, actually, I miss, for example, physical contact, physical touch, but I have it in all these different forms. And the law of, what's the word? Not compensation. Conservation, nothing is created or destroyed. Everything is always here, always present, but it just changes form. So when you go through this process and identify all the different forms now that you see, you recognize that you still have it. Might not be in the same form, but you still have it. And so going through this process, you recognize that nothing is missing. It never has been. And one of the things he says is, at the level of the soul, nothing is missing. The level of our human perception, we perceive that something is missing, but it never is. So it's bringing, again, the unconscious to the conscious and harmonizing them so we can actually integrate our experience and our warped perception. We change our biased perceptions to seeing the world as it is, seeing things as they are. And then when you do that, you're actually in a state of grace and presence rather than infatuating about something that perhaps also wasn't so great. He says, do you remember, your husband's smelly farts, for example, or, do you miss those, or do you miss this, or do you miss that? It often is that we pick out certain things that we miss, but we forget the other things. We have a subjective bias. We have a subjective memory. So yeah, those are just a few things, but this process is something that I'm now going to be adopting very, very much in my work, because having been through the experience myself, night and day, for one session, it can make such a significant difference that it's undeniable. And breathwork and other modalities can have just as profound effect, but this is something that for the world that's quite mental, that likes to understand and know and process cognitively, it's an incredibly powerful way of shifting your awareness, your consciousness, and actually being able to move on with your life, right? And moving in the direction that you want to go. That's what it's all about, right? Coming back to ourselves. So yeah, really, really powerful work. So the DeMartini method is what I'm fired up about right now.